The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory as Kieran Dawson rode with gritted teeth, his left arm crudely bandaged and throbbing with each movement of his horse. The year was 1875, and the promise of new beginnings had drawn him westward from Pennsylvania after the war, but fate had other plans for the 30-year-old cowboy. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage, a stark reminder of his encounter with rustlers the previous day. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, trudged forward at a steady pace, sensing his rider's discomfort. The vast expanse of golden prairie stretched before them, with the distant silhouette of the town of Whitethorn gradually growing larger on the horizon. "Just a bit further, boy," Kieran murmured to his horse, adjusting his position to relieve some pressure from his wounded arm. His supplies were dwindling, and the wound needed proper tending. The bullet had only grazed him, but out in these territories, even minor wounds could turn deadly without proper care. As Whitethorn came into view, Kieran observed the typical frontier town layout: a main street lined with wooden buildings, a saloon with swinging doors, a general store, and at the far end, what appeared to be a doctor's office. Relief washed over him at the sight. He'd been riding for nearly a day, pushing through the pain, determined to reach civilization before infection set in. The town was alive with the usual afternoon activities. Cowboys tethered their horses outside the saloon, merchants called out to potential customers, and children played in the dusty street. Kieran guided Copper toward the hitching post outside what appeared to be the doctor's office, dismounting with a wince as his injured arm protested against the movement. The sign above the door read, "Dr. Harold Jenkins, physician," but as Kieran approached, he noticed a different name painted on the window: Dr. Abigail Hammond. Confusion flickered across his face as he pushed open the door, a small bell announcing his arrival. The interior was neat and organized, with shelves of medical supplies lining the walls. A woman stood with her back to him, arranging bottles on a shelf. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her simple blue dress was covered by a white apron. "Excuse me," Kieran called, his voice rough from the dry trail. "Is Dr. Jenkins available?" The woman turned, revealing a face that momentarily stunned Kieran into silence. She couldn't have been more than 27, with intelligent green eyes and a smattering of freckles across her nose. Her expression shifted from polite inquiry to concern as she took in his bloodied arm. "Dr. Jenkins passed away 3 months ago," she replied, moving toward him. "I'm Dr. Hammond. I've taken over his practice." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit down before you fall down, Mr. Dawson." "Kieran Dawson," he replied, sinking gratefully into the offered seat. "You're the doctor." He couldn't keep the surprise from his voice, immediately regretting it when he saw her expression harden slightly. "Yes, Mr. Dawson, I am indeed the doctor," she replied evenly. "And from the looks of that arm, you're in need of my services. So perhaps we could set aside your disbelief for the moment." Kieran nodded, properly chastised. "My apologies, Dr. Hammond. It's been a long ride." Her expression softened as she began to examine his bandaged arm. "How did this happen?" she asked, carefully unwrapping the blood-soaked cloth. "Rustlers," he explained, wincing as the last layer of bandage pulled at the wound. "Caught them trying to take some of the cattle from the Carson ranch where I work. One of them got a shot off before they ran." Abigail examined the wound with practiced efficiency. "The bullet grazed you, but it's deep. You're lucky it didn't hit bone." She moved to a cabinet and began gathering supplies. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon. Rode through the night to get here." She turned back to him, eyebrows raised. You rode with this wound for nearly a day. Without proper treatment, didn't have much choice, Kieran replied with a slight shrug, immediately regretting the movement as pain shot through his arm. Abigail shook her head disapprovingly as she prepared a basin of water. Men and their stubbornness, you could have developed a serious infection. She began cleaning the wound, her touch gentle but firm. This will sting. Despite her warning, Kieran couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath as the antiseptic solution made contact with his torn flesh. Abigail worked methodically, cleaning away the dirt and dried blood. "You're new to Whitethorn," Kieran observed, trying to distract himself from the pain. "I arrived 4 months ago," she replied, focused on her work. "Dr. Jenkins was my mentor at medical school in Boston. When his health began failing, he asked me to come assist him." She paused, a shadow of sadness crossing her features. "He passed away shortly after I arrived. The town council decided to let me continue the practice, though not without some resistance." "I can imagine," Kieran said. The idea of a female doctor was unusual enough in the eastern cities, let alone in a frontier town like Whitethorn. "Most of the resistance faded after I successfully delivered twins during a difficult birth and treated a mining accident that left 3 men badly injured," she said with a hint of pride. "People care less about your gender when you're saving their lives or bringing their children safely into the world." As she spoke, she began stitching his wound with careful precision. Kieran was impressed by her steady hands and confident movements. "You're good at this," he commented. "I should hope so, Mr. Dawson. I didn't spend years studying medicine to be merely adequate." A small smile played at the corner of her mouth, softening her words. "Kieran," he corrected, "if you're going to be stitching me up, you might as well use my given name." "Very well, Kieran. And you may call me Abigail when I'm not treating you in a professional capacity." She tied off the last stitch and began applying a salve to the wound. "This will help prevent infection. I'll wrap it now, but you'll need to keep it clean and dry. Come back in 3 days so I can check on it." As she wrapped fresh bandages around his arm, Kieran noticed the delicate movements of her fingers, contrasting with the strength behind them. There was something compelling about this woman, who had defied convention to pursue medicine in the untamed West. "Where are you staying in town?" she asked as she secured the bandage. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," Kieran admitted. "Figured I'd find a room at the hotel after seeing to my arm." Abigail nodded. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house offers clean rooms at fair prices. The hotel tends to be noisy, with the saloon below." "I appreciate the recommendation," Kieran said, standing carefully. "What do I owe you for the treatment?" Abigail considered for a moment. $2 should cover the supplies and treatment." Kieran reached into his pocket with his good arm and produced the coins, placing them on her desk. "Thank you, Dr. Hammond. I'm in your debt." "Just doing my job," she replied. "Remember to come back in 3 days, sooner if you notice any increased redness, warmth, or discharge from the wound." As Kieran stepped back onto the street, the late afternoon sun warming his face, he found himself looking forward to his follow-up visit more than seemed reasonable for a man anticipating medical treatment. There was something about Dr. Abigail Hammond that intrigued him beyond her professional skills. He led Copper to the livery stable first, ensuring his faithful companion would be well cared for, then made his way to the boarding house Abigail had recommended. Mrs. Peterson proved to be a kindly widow in her 60s who fussed over his injury and insisted on showing him to a clean, modest room on the 2nd floor. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," she informed him. "We don't wait for latecomers, Mr. Dawson." "I'll be there," he promised, gratefully sinking onto the bed once she'd left him alone. For the first time in over 24 hours, Kieran allowed himself to truly rest. His thoughts drifted to green eyes and capable hands as exhaustion finally claimed him. The next morning, Kieran awoke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from downstairs. His arm throbbed dully, but the sharp pain had subsided. Dr. Hammond knew her business, he thought as he carefully dressed himself, favoring his injured arm. Breakfast at the boarding house was a communal affair, with Mrs. Peterson presiding over a table of 5 other boarders. 2 store clerks, a schoolteacher, a bank teller, and an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's former mayor. Conversation flowed easily, and Kieran found himself being brought up to speed on local matters. "Dr. Hammond saved my grandson's life last month," the former mayor, Mr. Whitaker, told him. "Boy came down with a terrible fever. Everyone thought we'd lose him, but that young lady sat with him 3 days straight, cooling his brow and administering medicines. Remarkable woman." "She certainly seems capable," Kieran agreed, trying not to appear too interested. The schoolteacher, Miss Winters, leaned forward. "We were all skeptical when she first arrived. A female doctor, unheard of, but she's won over most folks. Still, not everyone approves. Sheriff Caldwell and some of the other men think women should stick to traditional roles." "The sheriff's a fool, Mrs. Peterson interjected, refilling coffee cups. "His wife would have died in childbirth if not for Dr. Hammond." After breakfast, Kieran decided to explore the town. He needed to send word to the Carson ranch about the rustlers and his delay in returning. As he walked down the main street, he noticed several people glancing at his bandaged arm, but no one approached him. The telegraph office was located next to the bank. After sending his message to the ranch foreman, Kieran stepped back onto the boardwalk, nearly colliding with a man exiting the bank. The stranger was expensively dressed, with a silk vest and a gold watch chain visible beneath his tailored jacket. "Watch where you're going," the man snapped, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Pardon me," Kieran replied evenly, stepping aside. The man's eyes narrowed as he took in Kieran's bandaged arm. "Another one of Dr. Hammond's patients, I see. Better hope she didn't do more harm than good." Kieran felt his jaw tighten. "The doctor did fine work. I'd be grateful if you'd speak of her with respect." The man laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "You're new in town. I'm Maxwell Blackfield, owner of the Whitethorn Bank and most of the businesses on this street. I don't need to respect someone who doesn't respect the natural order of things. Women doctoring men. It's indecent. I find competence more important than outdated notions of decency," Kieran replied coolly. Blackfield's face darkened. "You do well to mind your own business, Cowboy. This town has certain standards. Standards that include disrespecting a woman who saves lives." Several passers-by had stopped to watch the exchange, and Kieran noticed a tall man with a sheriff's badge approaching. "Is there a problem here, Maxwell?" the sheriff asked, his hand resting casually near his holstered gun. "No problem, Sheriff," Blackfield replied smoothly. "Just educating our visitor on local customs." With a final dismissive glance at Kieran, he continued down the street. The sheriff turned his attention to Kieran. "Don't know you, stranger. What's your business in Whitethorn?" Name's Kieran Dawson. "I work at the Carson Ranch. Came to town for medical attention," he replied, gesturing to his bandaged arm. "Carson's a good man," the sheriff acknowledged. "I'm Sheriff Caldwell. Word of advice, Dawson, don't go stirring up trouble with Maxwell Blackfield. He's an important man in these parts. I was just defending Dr. Hammond's reputation." Caldwell's expression hardened slightly. "That woman's caused nothing but disruption since she arrived." Town was peaceful before her kind started demanding to step outside their proper place. "Her kind saved my arm, possibly my life," Kieran countered, keeping his voice level. "Seems like her proper place is exactly where she is." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "You'd best be on your way, Dawson. Wounded arm or not, I don't tolerate troublemakers in my town." Kieran tipped his hat and continued walking, his mind working through what he'd just learned. Clearly, Dr. Hammond had powerful enemies in Whitethorn, despite her obvious skills. The thought bothered him more than it should for a man who barely knew her. As he passed the general store, he decided to purchase a few supplies. Inside, he found a diverse array of goods typical of frontier mercantiles, everything from flour and sugar to tools and fabrics. While examining a display of work gloves, he overheard a conversation between the shopkeeper and a well-dressed woman. "I simply cannot understand why the town council allows that woman to continue practicing," the customer was saying. "It's unnatural for a female to be handling men's bodies, even in a medical capacity. My husband refuses to let me consult her, even for female complaints. Mrs. Blackfield, I assure you many in town share your concerns," the shopkeeper replied deferentially. But after she saved those miners and Mrs. Caldwell during her difficult delivery, the council felt they couldn't dismiss her without causing an uproar. Kieran moved to another section of the store, having heard enough. So Maxwell Blackfield and his wife were leading the opposition to Abigail's practice. He wondered how many others in town shared their views and how many supported the doctor. After purchasing a few necessities, Kieran stepped back onto the street just as a commotion erupted further down. A wagon had overturned and several people were gathering around. Without hesitation, he hurried toward the scene. A man was pinned beneath the wagon, his face contorted in pain. Several townspeople were attempting to lift the heavy vehicle, but it wouldn't budge. "We need more men," someone shouted. Kieran joined the effort, positioning himself at the wagon's edge and preparing to lift. Pain shot through his injured arm as he strained against the weight, but he gritted his teeth and continued. "On three," called a man who appeared to be organizing the effort. 1, 2, 3. With a collective groan, the group managed to lift the wagon just enough for two men to drag the injured person clear. As they lowered the wagon back down, Kieran felt a warm wetness on his arm and knew his wound had reopened. Before he could examine the damage, a familiar voice called out, "Make way, let me through." Abigail pushed through the crowd, medical bag in hand. She knelt beside the injured man, quickly assessing his condition. "Mr. Collins, can you feel your legs?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. The man nodded weakly. "Hurt something fierce, Doc." "That's actually a good sign," she replied, continuing her examination. After a few moments, she looked up at the gathered crowd. "He has a broken leg and possibly some cracked ribs, but no signs of internal bleeding. I need 4 strong men to carry him to my office." Volunteers stepped forward immediately, and Kieran moved to join them, but Abigail's sharp gaze caught him. "Not you, Mr. Dawson," she said firmly. "Your bandage is soaked through." Kieran glanced down to see blood staining his sleeve. "It's nothing," he started to protest. "You don't have to be brave for me," she countered, her voice softening slightly. "Wait outside my office. I'll tend to you after I set Mr. Collins's leg." Something in her tone, the genuine concern beneath the professional exterior, silenced his objections. Kieran nodded and stepped back, watching as the volunteers carefully lifted the injured man and followed Abigail's directions. As the crowd dispersed, Kieran felt someone watching him. Turning, he saw Maxwell Blackfield and the sheriff observing from the boardwalk. Neither man's expression was friendly. Ignoring them, Kieran made his way toward the doctor's office to await his turn. An hour later, Kieran sat in the same chair he'd occupied the previous day as Abigail examined his reopened wound. Her face was set in disapproving lines. "You could have caused significant damage," she scolded, cleaning the wound carefully. "The stitches have held, thankfully, but you've set back your healing." "I couldn't stand by and do nothing," Kieran replied. "There were plenty of able-bodied men present with 2 good arms," she countered, though her tone held more resignation than anger. "But I suppose asking cowboys to be sensible is like asking the sun not to rise. How's Mr. Collins? He'll recover. Clean break, set properly. He'll be off his feet for a while, but there shouldn't be any permanent damage." She began wrapping fresh bandages around his arm. "I saw you speaking with Maxwell Blackfield earlier." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." "Small town," she replied with a slight shrug. "I should warn you, he's not a man to cross lightly." "So I gathered. He doesn't seem fond of you." Abigail's hands paused momentarily in their work. "Mr. Blackfield believes women should be decorative, subservient, and preferably silent. A female physician challenges everything he considers proper. And the sheriff seems to share his views." "Sheriff Caldwell is complicated," she said, securing the bandage. "He doesn't approve of me, but since I saved his wife and newborn daughter during a difficult birth, he tolerates my presence. It's an uneasy truce." "You ever consider leaving, finding a place more accepting?" Abigail met his gaze directly. "Every day. And every day I decide to stay because the people who need medical care don't care about the gender of the person providing it." Kieran found himself admiring her determination. "That takes courage, or stubbornness," she replied with a small smile. "Now I want you to promise me you'll avoid lifting anything heavier than a coffee cup for at least a week." "I'll try," he said, "but I need to get back to the ranch soon. I have responsibilities." "At least give it 3 more days," she insisted. "Come see me again tomorrow and we'll reassess." As Kieran walked back to the boarding house, he found himself thinking about Abigail Hammond's situation. A woman alone in a frontier town, practicing a profession many considered inappropriate for her gender, facing opposition from powerful citizens. Yet she persisted, committed to her calling despite the difficulties. He'd come to Whitethorn seeking medical treatment for a bullet wound. He hadn't expected to find someone who intrigued him so thoroughly, a woman of intelligence, skill, and quiet courage. As he entered the boarding house, he realized he was in no hurry to return to the isolated ranch life that had been his existence for the past 2 years. The next morning brought unexpected news. A telegram arrived from the Carson Ranch foreman. The rustlers had returned, stealing a significant portion of the herd and setting fire to one of the outbuildings. The message urged Kieran to take his time healing, as the ranch was temporarily reducing staff until they could rebuild. The news left Kieran with mixed feelings. He was concerned for his fellow ranch hands and the Carsons, but found himself relieved to have a legitimate reason to extend his stay in Whitethorn. After sending a reply expressing his concern and confirming he would remain in town until fully healed, he decided to explore more of Whitethorn. The town was larger than it initially appeared, with neighborhoods extending beyond the main street. On the north side were modest homes where many of the townsfolk lived. To the south, grander houses stood on larger lots, clearly belonging to the more affluent citizens. The west end of town featured a small church, a schoolhouse, and a community hall. East of the main street, closer to the creek that gave the town its water supply, stood the livery stable, blacksmith shop, and several warehouses. Kieran found himself drawn to a small building set apart from the others, near the creek. A sign identified it as the town library, and curiosity led him inside. The interior was cool and quiet, with shelves of books lining the walls and tables for reading scattered throughout. Only one other person was present, Abigail Hammond, absorbed in a thick volume. She looked up at his entrance, surprise registering on her face. "Mr. Dawson," she greeted him. "I didn't expect to find you here." "I'm full of surprises," he replied with a smile, approaching her table. "And I believe we agreed on Kieran when you're not treating me." "So we did," she acknowledged, closing her book. "Are you a reader, Kieran?" "When I get the chance." He glanced at her book. "Medical text, actually. It's a novel by George Eliot. Middlemark. My practice keeps me busy, but I try to set aside time for reading that isn't related to medicine." "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Please," she replied, marking her place in the book. As he sat, Kieran noticed she looked different outside her office, less guarded, perhaps. Her hair was arranged in the same practical style, but without her apron, dressed in a simple green dress that complemented her eyes. She seemed younger, less formal. "I received word from the ranch this morning," he told her. "There's been some trouble with the rustlers returning. They've asked me to stay in town until I'm fully healed, as they're temporarily reducing staff." "I'm sorry to hear about the ranch," Abigail said, genuine concern in her voice. "But from a medical perspective, I'm relieved you won't be rushing back to physical labor." "It gives me a chance to become better acquainted with Whitethorn," Kieran said, "and its residents." Abigail studied him for a moment. "You're not what I expected, Kieran Dawson." "What did you expect?" "The typical cowboy, rough, impatient with recovery, eager to prove his toughness by ignoring medical advice." She smiled slightly. "Though you did re-injure yourself helping with that wagon." "I'm still a cowboy," he reminded her. "Just one who appreciates a good book and recognizes when a doctor knows best." He paused, then asked, "What brought you west, Abigail? Medical school in Boston, then all the way to Wyoming Territory. That's quite a journey." Her expression grew more serious. "After my parents died of influenza when I was 19, I was determined to become a doctor. I was fortunate they left me enough money for my education, and my aunt supported my ambitions. I met Dr. Jenkins during my training. He was one of the few physicians who didn't treat female medical students with contempt." She traced the spine of her book absently. "When he wrote that he was ill and needed someone to take over his practice eventually, I saw an opportunity. Eastern cities have plenty of doctors, even if most hospitals won't hire women physicians. But out here, where medical care is scarce, skills matter more than gender. At least that's what I hoped." "And has it proven true?" "Partially," she admitted. "Many accept me out of necessity. Some have come to respect me. Others, like the Blackfields, will never approve." "Do their opinions matter to you?" "Less than they once did," she replied thoughtfully. "But Maxwell Blackfield owns the building where my office is located. He's raised the rent twice in 4 months. If he continues, I may be forced to leave regardless of my wishes." Kieran frowned. "That seems deliberately malicious." "It is," Abigail confirmed. "He wants me gone. His wife believes a female doctor is immoral, and he shares her views. Plus, I suspect he resents that I refused to treat his gout with the methods he demanded. I recommended dietary changes and less alcohol. He wanted me to prescribe laudanum." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the librarian, an elderly woman who beamed at Abigail. "Dr. Hammond. I've set aside that book on herbal remedies you inquired about." "Thank you, Mrs. Foster. This is Mr. Dawson, a patient of mine." The librarian nodded politely to Kieran. "Any friend of the doctor's is welcome here. Let me know if you need assistance finding something to read during your recovery." After Mrs. Foster returned to her desk, Abigail stood. "I should collect that book and return to my office. I have patients coming this afternoon." Kieran rose as well. Would you consider having dinner with me this evening? Mrs. Peterson sets a fine table at the boarding house, and I'd enjoy continuing our conversation." Abigail appeared taken aback by the invitation. That's very kind, but I'm not sure it would be appropriate. You're my patient. I'm also new in town and could use the company of someone intelligent," Kieran countered. "But if you're concerned about appearances, perhaps we could meet at the cafe instead. More public, less likely to cause talk." She hesitated, then nodded. "The cafe would be acceptable. 7 o'clock. "I'll be there," Kieran promised. Pleased she had accepted. As he watched her collect her book from Mrs. Foster and leave the library, Kieran realized how much he was looking forward to the evening. Abigail Hammond was unlike any woman he'd met before, intelligent, principled, and unafraid to forge her own path, despite opposition. The fact that she was also strikingly beautiful was an added complication he hadn't anticipated when he rode into Whitethorn seeking medical attention. That evening, Kieran arrived at the cafe early, selecting a table near the window. The establishment was modestly decorated but clean, with checkered tablecloths and simple wooden chairs. Several other diners were already enjoying their meals, and a cheerful waitress approached to pour him coffee. "Evening, mister. You waiting on someone?" she asked. "Yes, Dr. Hammond will be joining me," Kieran replied. The waitress's eyebrows rose slightly, but she simply nodded. "She's good people, the doctor. Saved my little brother when he got kicked by a horse last month." "I'll bring another cup when she arrives." Abigail entered a few minutes later, looking somewhat self-conscious. She had changed into a blue dress with a white lace collar, her hair arranged more carefully than he'd seen before. Several diners glanced up at her entrance, their expressions ranging from friendly nods to disapproving frowns. Kieran stood as she approached the table, pulling out her chair. "You look lovely," he said quietly as she sat. "Thank you," she replied, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I don't often have occasion to dress for dinner." The waitress returned with another coffee cup and took their orders: beef stew for Kieran and chicken pie for Abigail. As she walked away, Abigail glanced around the cafe, noting the mixed reactions to her presence. "You're causing quite a stir, dining with the controversial lady doctor," she commented wryly. "Let them stir," Kieran replied with a dismissive gesture. "I prefer to choose my company based on character rather than popular opinion." "A dangerous philosophy in a small town," she observed, though her expression suggested she appreciated the sentiment. Their conversation flowed easily as they ate, touching on books they'd both read, places they'd visited, and experiences that had shaped them. Kieran told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, his service in the Union Army during the final year of the Civil War, and his decision to head west afterward, seeking a simpler life. "After seeing so much death, I wanted open spaces and honest work," he explained. "Ranching suited me. No complicated decisions, just the rhythm of the seasons and caring for the cattle." "Yet you read novels and visit libraries," Abigail noted. "You haven't abandoned all civilization." "I may prefer open country to cities, but I never saw the point in abandoning the pleasures of the mind," he replied. "What about you? Do you miss Boston and its culture?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "The theaters, museums, libraries, but I don't miss the restrictions." As a female physician there, I was constantly fighting for respect, constantly having to prove myself superior just to be considered adequate. Here, at least the battle lines are clearly drawn. As they were finishing their meal, the cafe door opened and Maxwell Blackfield entered with his wife, a tall, thin woman with a perpetual expression of disapproval. The couple paused when they spotted Abigail and Kieran, exchanging glances before deliberately selecting a table across the room. Ignore them, Kieran advised, noticing Abigail's tension. I try, but it's difficult when they control my future here. She sighed. He's raised my rent again, effective next month. I received the notice today. Kieran frowned. That's the third increase. Surely that's not legal. It's perfectly legal. There's no rent control in Wyoming Territory, and I have no formal lease. I pay month to month. She stirred her coffee absently. I've been looking for alternative locations, but there's nothing suitable available. What will you do? I have some savings. I can manage for a few months, but eventually I'll have to either find a new location or leave Whitethorn. Her expression grew determined. I won't give up easily, though. Too many people here need medical care. Throughout their conversation, Kieran was aware of the Blackfields watching them, occasionally whispering to each other. When they finished their meal and Kieran paid the bill, he offered Abigail his arm. May I walk you home? It's getting dark. She hesitated only briefly before accepting, placing her hand lightly on his offered arm. Thank you. As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Kieran was acutely aware of her presence beside him. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before Abigail spoke. I'm staying in rooms above my office, she explained. It's convenient for emergency calls. Convenient but isolating, Kieran observed. Do you ever feel lonely here? Abigail considered the question seriously. Yes, she finally admitted. I have patients who respect me, a few friends like Mrs. Foster at the library, but there's a difference between being among people and truly belonging. I understand that feeling, Kieran said softly. Even at the ranch, surrounded by good men, there's a certain solitude that never quite leaves. They reached the stairs leading to her rooms above the medical office. Abigail turned to face him, her expression open and unguarded in the dim light from the nearby street lamp. Thank you for dinner, Kieran. It was pleasant to have conversation that wasn't focused on ailments or treatments. The pleasure was mine, he replied sincerely. Perhaps we could do it again before I return to the ranch. A smile touched her lips. I'd like that. She paused, then added, You should come by the office tomorrow. I want to check that arm again, make sure yesterday's strain didn't cause any lasting damage. I'll be there, he promised, reluctant to end the evening but aware of the curious glances from passers-by. Good night, Abigail. Good night, she replied, ascending the stairs with a final glance back at him. As Kieran walked back to the boarding house, he found himself thinking about Abigail's situation with Blackfield. The banker's tactics seemed deliberately designed to force her out of town, using his financial power where direct confrontation had failed. The injustice of it bothered Kieran deeply. He wondered if there might be some way to help her stand against such bullying. The next morning, Kieran visited the town's land office, curious about property availability in Whitethorn. The clerk, a bespectacled man named Jenkins, was initially reserved but became more helpful when Kieran explained he was looking on behalf of Dr. Hammond. The doctor's been good to my family, Jenkins confided, lowering his voice. My wife had a difficult time with our last baby. Dr. Hammond stayed with her 2 days straight, wouldn't leave her side. Don't tell Mr. Blackfield I helped you, though. According to Jenkins, there were few suitable properties available in the town proper. Most buildings on the main street were owned by Blackfield or his associates. There was, however, one interesting possibility: a small house on the edge of town that had belonged to the previous doctor. Jenkins left it to his sister in St. Louis, the clerk explained. She's been trying to sell it for months, but Blackfield's been discouraging potential buyers. Says it needs too many repairs, not worth the asking price. Truth is, he wants to buy it himself cheap, but the sister won't sell to him. She didn't approve of how he treated her brother. Is it suitable for a medical practice? Kieran asked. It was built with that in mind. Has a separate entrance for the office portion, living quarters upstairs. Needs some work, sure, but the structure's sound. It's just sitting empty. And the sister would sell to Dr. Hammond, Jenkins smiled. I'd wager she'd be pleased as punch to sell to the doctor her brother trained. I can send a telegram if you're serious. Please do, Kieran replied, and inquire about the price. After leaving the land office, Kieran walked to Abigail's office for his scheduled checkup. He found her treating a young boy with a splinted arm, giving instructions to his mother on care. When they left, she turned her attention to him. Let's see how that arm is healing, she said, gesturing to the examination table. As she removed the bandage, Kieran told her about his visit to the land office and the possibility of Dr. Jenkins's house. I've seen that house, Abigail said, her hands pausing in their work. It's a lovely old place, perfect for a combined home and practice, but I assumed it had been sold. Apparently not, Kieran replied. The sister has been holding out for the right buyer. Jenkins thinks she'd sell to you. Even if she would, I'm not sure I could afford it, Abigail said, resuming her examination of his wound. I've been saving, but property isn't cheap, even on the frontier. The wound is healing nicely, she continued, changing the subject. No signs of infection. Keep it clean and dry for another few days, and you should be able to use the arm more freely. Just avoid heavy lifting for at least another week. I'll be careful, Kieran promised. About the house, would you at least consider looking at it? Jenkins is sending a telegram to the sister about the price. Abigail's expression softened. Why are you doing this, Kieran? You barely know me. I know enough, he replied simply. I know you're a skilled physician who deserves better than to be driven out of town by a bully with too much money and power. And I know that the people of Whitethorn need you, whether they all recognize it or not. She studied his face, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, as she nodded slowly. All right, I'll look at the house. But don't get your hopes up. Property ownership is a significant commitment. Later that afternoon, Jenkins sent word that Dr. Jenkins's sister had responded enthusiastically to the inquiry. She was asking a fair price for the property and expressed delight that her brother's former student might continue his legacy there. Jenkins arranged for Kieran and Abigail to view the house the following day. The house stood on a quiet street at the eastern edge of town, set back from the road with several mature trees providing shade. Though clearly in need of maintenance, the paint was peeling. The small front garden overgrown, the structure itself appeared solid. Jenkins met them there with the key. It's been vacant for nearly 6 months, he explained as he unlocked the door. But Mrs. Wilson, the sister, has been paying a local boy to check on it weekly, make sure there's no damage. The interior was dusty but otherwise well preserved. The ground floor was divided into a waiting room, examination room, and office, with a small kitchen and dining area at the back. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and a modest sitting room. Throughout the house were signs of Dr. Jenkins's long residence bookshelves built into the walls, cabinets designed for medical supplies, even a special sink with a pump in the examination room. Abigail walked through the room slowly, running her hand along the examination table, inspecting the built-in features. Her expression was a mixture of appreciation and nostalgia. He showed me drawings of this place, she said softly. During my studies, he'd talk about his practice here, how he designed everything to be practical but comfortable for patients. She opened a cabinet to reveal shelves perfectly sized for medicine bottles. He was so proud of these little details. Kieran watched her, seeing how right she looked in these surroundings. It suits you, he observed. She turned to him, her expression uncertain. It's perfect, actually. But the price? Jenkins, who had been tactfully examining the kitchen, rejoined them. Mrs. Wilson is asking $2,000. She says it's negotiable for Dr. Hammond out of respect for her brother. Abigail's face fell slightly. That's a fair price, but more than I've saved. Banks offer mortgages for property purchases, Kieran suggested. Blackfield owns the only bank in town, she reminded him. He'd never approve a loan for me. They thanked Jenkins and left the house, walking slowly back toward the main street. Abigail was unusually quiet, lost in thought. There might be other options, Kieran said, breaking the silence. Regional banks in larger towns, private investors. Perhaps, she agreed, though she didn't sound convinced. I'll need to consider carefully. It's a significant decision. As they reached the main street, they encountered Sheriff Caldwell outside the general store. He nodded to them, his expression neutral. Dr. Hammond, Dawson. His gaze lingered on Kieran's bandaged arm. How's the recovery coming along? Well, thank you, Kieran replied. Doctor Hammond does excellent work. The sheriff's mouth twitched slightly. So I've heard. My Sarah asks after you, doctor, says she owes you a visit. Please tell her she's welcome anytime, Abigail replied. And how is little Emma? Growing like a weed, Caldwell said, a rare smile softening his weathered features. Keeping Sarah busy day and night. He hesitated, then added, I hear you're having some trouble with your office situation. Abigail looked surprised at his knowledge. News travels fast in Whitethorn. Small towns, he agreed. Look, I don't agree with everything you represent, Doctor. Women should be home raising families, in my view. But he glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. What Blackfield's doing ain't right. Using money to bully folks never sits well with me, even when I disagree with them. Thank you for saying so, Sheriff, Abigail replied sincerely. Caldwell nodded gruffly. Don't mention it. Literally. Wouldn't do for the banker to think I'm taking sides. With that, he tipped his hat and continued on his way. Well, Kieran said once the sheriff was out of earshot, it seems you have more allies than you realized. Reluctant ones, Abigail replied, though she looked thoughtful, but perhaps you're right. Over the next few days, Kieran divided his time between helping around the boarding house to earn his keep, checking on the progress of his arm with Abigail, and discreetly inquiring about financing options for the purchase of Dr. Jenkins's house. He learned that the nearest bank that might consider lending to Abigail was in Cheyenne, nearly 100 miles away. On his 5th day in Whitethorn, Kieran received another telegram from the Carson Ranch. The situation had stabilized, and while they weren't rushing him, they could use his help when he was able to return. The message included the news that they'd identified the rustlers and recovered most of the stolen cattle with the sheriff's assistance. The telegram presented Kieran with a dilemma. His arm was healing well, and while not fully recovered, he was capable of light work. The ranch needed him, but the thought of leaving Whitethorn, leaving Abigail, before resolving her situation troubled him. That evening, he invited Abigail for a walk along the creek that ran near the edge of town. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, and wildflowers dotted the grassy banks of the water. I received word from the ranch today, Kieran told her as they walked. They're asking when I might return. And what did you tell them? Abigail asked, her voice carefully neutral. I haven't replied yet, he admitted. My arm is healing well thanks to your care, but, she prompted when he didn't continue. Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her directly. But I find myself reluctant to leave, specifically reluctant to leave you. Abigail's eyes widened slightly. Kieran, I know we've only known each other a short time, he continued, but I've come to care for you, Abigail, more than I expected, more than is probably wise. Why isn't it wise? she asked softly. Because you have your life here, your practice, your challenges, and I have responsibilities at the ranch. Because you deserve someone who can offer you more than a cowboy with little to his name beyond a good horse and a year's wages saved. Abigail stepped closer to him, her expression serious. I've never judged a man by his possessions, Kieran, only by his character. She hesitated, then added, and I've come to care for you too. Your kindness, your respect for my work, your willingness to stand up for what's right. These things matter far more than money or position. Kieran reached out with his good arm, gently taking her hand. I've been thinking about the house. I have some savings. Not enough for the full amount, but perhaps enough for a down payment if Mrs. Wilson is willing to accept payments over time. Kieran, I couldn't possibly accept. It would be an investment, he interrupted. A business arrangement. You'd repay the loan over time with interest if you insist, but it would give you independence from Blackfield, security for your practice. Why would you do that? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Because I believe in you, he replied simply. Because I want to see you succeed here, to prove that a woman can be both a respected physician and... He paused, gathering his courage, and someone I could court properly if you were amenable. A smile slowly spread across Abigail's face, transforming her features. I believe I would be very amenable to that, Kieran Dawson. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. They turned to see Maxwell Blackfield riding toward them, accompanied by two men Kieran didn't recognize. The banker's expression was thunderous as he reined in his horse. "So this is where you're hiding, Dr. Hammond," Blackfield called. "I've been looking for you. There's a matter we need to discuss." Kieran stepped slightly in front of Abigail, his posture protective. "Whatever business you have can wait until tomorrow during proper hours, Blackfield." The banker's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. This is between the doctor and me." "I disagree," Kieran replied evenly. "Anything concerning Dr. Hammond concerns me." Blackfield dismounted, handing his reins to one of his companions. "I've come to deliver a message. The town council met this afternoon. We've decided that having a female physician is causing too much disruption in our community. You have 1 week to close your practice and leave Whitethorn, Doctor." Abigail stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "On what grounds? I've broken no laws, violated no regulations. I'm a fully licensed physician." "Moral grounds," Blackfield replied smugly. "The council has the authority to determine what businesses operate within town limits. We've determined that your practice is inappropriate." "The full council voted on this?" Kieran asked, suspicion clear in his voice. "A majority," Blackfield hedged. "I demand to see the written decision," Abigail said firmly, "and to know which council members voted and on what specific grounds." Blackfield's confidence wavered slightly. "The documentation will be delivered tomorrow, but the decision is final." 1 week, Doctor. After that, the sheriff will be instructed to close your office." As he remounted his horse, he added, "And your lease is terminated, effective immediately. You have 3 days to vacate the premises." After Blackfield and his men rode off, Abigail stood motionless, her face pale but composed. "He's been planning this," she said finally. "Waiting for the right moment, gathering his allies on the council." "This can't be legal," Kieran protested. "He can't simply evict you without proper notice." "He owns the building," Abigail replied tiredly, "and he has enough influence to make the council bend to his will." She looked toward the town, her expression resolute. "But I won't give up without a fight. I need to speak with Sheriff Caldwell, find out if this council decision is legitimate." They walked back to town quickly, heading directly to the sheriff's office. Caldwell was at his desk, reviewing wanted posters. He looked up in surprise as they entered. "Dr. Dawson, what brings you here at this hour?" Abigail explained their encounter with Blackfield and the supposed council decision. As she spoke, the sheriff's expression grew increasingly troubled. "I hadn't heard about any such meeting," he said when she finished. "And I'm supposed to be notified of all council decisions that involve enforcement actions." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Blackfield's overreaching. The council can regulate businesses, true, but they need legitimate grounds, health concerns, safety violations, that sort of thing. Not personal disapproval. Will you support me if I challenge this?" Abigail asked directly. Caldwell was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his response. "I'll uphold the law, Doctor. If Blackfield's manipulated the council into an improper decision, I won't enforce it. But I can't openly oppose him either. He's too powerful in this town." "Thank you, Sheriff," Abigail said sincerely. "That's all I ask, that the law be applied fairly." As they left the sheriff's office, Kieran could see the strain in Abigail's face despite her composed demeanor. "What will you do now?" he asked gently. "First, I need to find somewhere to stay for the night since I've apparently been evicted," she replied, attempting a light tone but not quite succeeding. "Then tomorrow I'll start gathering support from townspeople who have benefited from my services." "Blackfield can't bully everyone. Mrs. Peterson always has a spare room at the boarding house," Kieran suggested. "And I'll speak to Jenkins about expediting communication with Dr. Jenkins's sister. If we can secure that house quickly, you'd have both a place to live and to practice." Abigail turned to him, gratitude in her eyes. "You don't have to involve yourself in this fight, Kieran. It could damage your reputation, your standing at the ranch." "I'm already involved," he replied firmly, taking her hand. "And I don't intend to walk away from you or this situation." The next morning brought surprising developments. Word of Blackfield's confrontation with Abigail had spread through town overnight, and public reaction was mixed but passionate. While some residents supported the banker's position that a female doctor was inappropriate, many others were outraged at the heavy-handed tactics being employed. Mrs. Peterson had not only provided Abigail with a room, but had also organized a meeting of townswomen who had benefited from Abigail's care. The boarding house parlor was filled with determined faces when Kieran came downstairs for breakfast. "We won't stand for this bullying, Mrs. Peterson declared as she poured coffee for the assembled women. "Dr. Hammond delivered half the babies born in this town over the past 4 months, treated our children, cared for our husbands. Who does Maxwell Blackfield think he is, deciding we can't have a woman doctor if we choose?" Similar sentiments were echoed around the room. Kieran slipped quietly into the kitchen, not wanting to intrude on the women's planning session, but feeling a surge of hope. Abigail had more allies than perhaps even she had realized. Later that morning, Jenkins brought news from Dr. Jenkins's sister. She was willing to sell the house to Abigail for $1,800 less than the asking price, and would accept a down payment with the remainder to be paid over 5 years. She also expressed her delight that her brother's former student would continue his work in the house he had loved. "This is extraordinary," Abigail said when Jenkins delivered the letter. "But even with the reduced price, I don't have enough saved for a substantial down payment." "I do," Kieran said quietly. "Between my savings and the payments I'll receive for the cattle we recovered from the rustlers, I can cover half the purchase price. You could repay me as your practice grows." Abigail looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. "Kieran, that's an enormous commitment. What if I can't repay you? What if Blackfield succeeds in driving me out of practice despite having the house?" "Then I'll own half a house in Whitethorn," he replied with a smile. which wouldn't be the worst investment for a man considering spending more time in town. Jenkins cleared his throat. If you're serious about this, I can draw up the preliminary papers today. Mrs. Wilson authorized me to act as her agent. The matter was settled by midday. Kieran provided Jenkins with drafts for his portion of the down payment, and Abigail added her savings. The house would be officially transferred to Abigail's ownership within the week, with Kieran holding a lien for his portion until repaid. Meanwhile, resistance to Blackfield's decree was growing. Sheriff Caldwell had confirmed that no official council meeting had taken place, merely an informal gathering of Blackfield and two allies who had agreed with his position. Without a proper vote, the eviction order had no legal standing. By evening, a delegation of townspeople had visited Blackfield at his home, making it clear that they supported Abigail's right to practice medicine in Whitethorn. The banker was reportedly furious but temporarily outmaneuvered. As the sun set, Kieran and Abigail walked to Dr. Jenkins's house, soon to be Abigail's house, to make plans for necessary repairs and the move. The evening was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the nearby prairie. "I still can't quite believe this is happening," Abigail said as they stood on the porch, looking out at the property that would soon be hers. "A week ago, I was facing the possibility of being driven out of town. Now I'm about to own a home and secure my practice." "You earned this," Kieran told her, "through your skill, your dedication, your courage in the face of prejudice and opposition." "I had help," she replied, turning to face him. "Your help specifically. I don't know how to thank you properly." "You don't need to thank me," he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "But there is something I've been wanting to do since that evening by the creek." Abigail's eyes met his, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And what might that be, Mr. Dawson?" In answer, Kieran leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he gently pressed his lips to hers in a tender, questioning kiss. Abigail responded by stepping closer, her free hand coming to rest lightly on his chest as she returned the kiss with equal tenderness. When they parted, Kieran kept hold of her hand, his heart racing. "I need to return to the ranch soon," he said reluctantly, "but I don't want this to be goodbye." "What are you suggesting?" Abigail asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm suggesting that I help you settle into this house, make the necessary repairs, then return to the ranch to fulfill my obligations. But I'd like to come back to Whitethorn to you regularly, to see where this might lead." "I'd like that," she replied, a soft smile lighting her features. "Very much." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Kieran helped Abigail move her belongings and medical equipment from her old office to the new house. The townspeople who supported her rallied around, offering assistance with cleaning, repairs, and even providing furniture for the rooms that needed it. Maxwell Blackfield made one final attempt to block the purchase of the house, offering Mrs. Wilson significantly more money through a telegram. She responded with a firmly worded message declining his offer, and expressing her pleasure that her brother's home would continue to serve the community through Abigail's practice. Defeated on that front, Blackfield retreated, though his disapproving glares whenever he encountered Abigail or Kieran in town made his feelings clear. His wife and a few close associates continued to shun Abigail, but increasingly they were in the minority. A week after the confrontation by the creek, Abigail's new medical practice was officially open in Dr. Jenkins's former home. A fresh sign hung beside the door: Dr. Abigail Hammond, physician and surgeon. The waiting room was already occupied with patients on the first morning, a clear indication of the community's support. Kieran's arm had healed enough for him to return to the ranch. though Abigail insisted on checking it one last time before he departed. In the privacy of her new examination room, their professional relationship gave way to more personal feelings as the examination concluded. "You'll need to be careful for another week or two," she advised, her professional tone belied by the way her hands lingered on his arm. "No roping, no heavy lifting." "I'll be careful," he promised, covering her hand with his. "I have a very compelling reason to stay healthy and return to town as soon as possible." Abigail looked up at him, her expression softening. "How soon will that be?" "2 weeks," Kieran replied. "Mr. Carson has agreed to regular time off in exchange for my handling some business matters for the ranch in town." He smiled. "Apparently, having a connection to the town's physician is considered valuable." 2 weeks, Abigail repeated, as if memorizing the time frame. "It will seem like a long time." "For me as well," Kieran admitted, drawing her closer. "But I'll write, and knowing you're here, secure in your own home and practice, will make the separation easier to bear." "You've changed my life, Kieran Dawson," Abigail said softly. "When you rode into town with that bandaged arm, I never imagined where it would lead." "You changed mine as well," he replied. "I came seeking medical treatment and found so much more." Their farewell kiss was bittersweet, filled with the promise of reunion but tinged with the sadness of temporary parting. As Kieran mounted Copper for the ride back to the Carson Ranch, Abigail stood on the porch of her new home, watching him. "You don't have to be brave for me," she called as he prepared to ride away. "Come back safely, Kieran." He tipped his hat to her, a smile warming his features. "That's a promise I intend to keep, Dr. Hammond. You can count on it." As Kieran rode out of Whitethorn, his arm still bandaged but healing well, he felt a sense of purpose and happiness he hadn't experienced in years. The open road ahead would take him temporarily away from Abigail, but he knew with certainty that his future was tied to hers now, in ways neither of them could have predicted when a wounded cowboy rode into town seeking a doctor's care. The bond they'd formed in such a short time felt stronger and more meaningful than any he'd known before. In Abigail, he'd found not just a skilled physician who had healed his wounded arm, but a woman of courage, intelligence, and compassion who had begun to heal parts of himself he hadn't even realized were broken. And as the town of Whitethorn faded behind him, Kieran Dawson rode toward the Carson Ranch with the certainty that, in 2 weeks' time, he would be returning to the woman who had unexpectedly captured his heart, a woman who had built her life on healing others, but who had somehow also managed to heal him. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold and red on the trees surrounding Abigail's home, Kieran Dawson formally asked for her hand in marriage. They were married in the town church the following spring, with nearly the entire community in attendance, including Sheriff Caldwell and his wife, their healthy toddler daughter a living testament to Abigail's skill. Maxwell Blackfield and his wife were noticeably absent from the celebration, but their opposition had faded to mere background noise in the life Kieran and Abigail were building together. With Kieran's support, Abigail's medical practice flourished, becoming an essential part of Whitethorn's growth and well-being. Kieran continued to work at the Carson Ranch 3 weeks of each month, returning to town for the 4th week to help with the medical practice and be with his wife. By the end of their first year of marriage, they had saved enough for Kieran to purchase a small ranch neighboring the Hammond property, allowing him to build a life that balanced his love of ranching with his devotion to Abigail and her work. In the years that followed, Abigail trained several young women as nurses and midwives, expanding healthcare access throughout the region. When their daughter was born in the 2nd year of their marriage, followed by twin sons 2 years later, they built an addition to the house, creating a home that seamlessly blended family life with Abigail's continued medical practice. The story of the wounded cowboy and the woman doctor who told him he didn't have to be brave for her became something of a local legend in Whitethorn. It represented not just a romance that had blossomed from an unexpected meeting, but the changing frontier itself, where traditional boundaries were being challenged, and where courage took many forms, from facing down rustlers to standing up for one's right to practice medicine regardless of gender. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and patient calls had ceased for the day, Kieran and Abigail would often sit on the porch of the home they had fought for, his arm long since healed but carrying a scar that reminded them both of their beginning wrapped around her shoulders as they watched the sun set over the Wyoming horizon, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought a wounded cowboy to a remarkable doctor's door.